This is session 4, video 2. We're going to go over the various research approaches again. The first is observational research. Observational research gathers data by observing relevant people and actions or situations. And this can be observing them, again, individually. An observer actually watches people and records what they do, what actions they take, or it can actually be done digitally. So, for example, in a grocery store, you could have somebody who observes in the cereal aisle, an observer who records what kind of cereal people buy and gathers a little bit of quite obvious, or often obvious, not always obvious, demographic information about them, their gender, roughly what their age happens to be, that sort of thing. Or you can gather that information digitally. When you scan the item in the grocery store, that information is captured and recorded to be used for future research. It is, however, impossible to accurately observe feelings. You may be able to speculate how a person is feeling, but it's not really a great measure or way to, it's not the kind of thing you should be gathering through observational research. Now, ethnographic research is a specific type of observational research where the researcher actually embeds themselves into a situation over a very much longer period of time to get a deeper sense of what's going on. So if you remember Jane Goodall, she's the famous researcher who spent years and years and years living with gorillas in the jungles of Africa. She was engaged in ethnographic research. She just didn't go into the jungles and observe the gorillas for an hour and record what they did and left. She actually stayed for years and years and years and observed these gorillas and their interactions on a much more deeper level. Survey research gathers information by asking people questions. It's by far the most common method for collecting primary data, and it's really good for collecting data that is descriptive in nature. So tell me your age, tell me your gender, how much money do you make, where do you live, how often do you shop here, what's your favorite brand of breakfast cereal, those sorts of things. Questions that people can pretty easily answer without having to rely too much on gathering other information, or these are questions that are easy for consumers to answer and is by far the most common type of research approach. And then the last one is experimental, which is about matching groups of people and looking for different responses based on different stimuli. It's really, really good and effective for explaining cause and effect type relationships or causal research, but it's actually quite expensive and time consuming to do because in order to do experimental research and do it really well, you have to have a controlled environment. You have to almost set up a lab type experiment. You could have, for example, a fake grocery store where people go in and you observe and track what they do and you change various variables in the store. You could change the music, you can change the location of certain items and see how people respond. But it is actually quite time consuming and very expensive. But it does give you a good insight into cause and effect relationships. If you're going to be contacting individuals to encourage them to participate in your data collection exercises, particularly if you're using surveys, there's actually 4 broad ways to contact people: by mail, by telephone, in person, or online. And each of these different contact methods has strengths, but also has real challenges. And so I just want you to take a look at that particular table. I'm not going to spend any time talking about it in any great length, other than to point out that sort of online surveys are really inexpensive and they're very effective. You can target online surveys. The response rate's relatively good. And more because technology is just becoming so pervasive, we're turning towards online surveys a lot more. Mail surveys in general are not very popular anymore. The response rate is dreadful. The cost, it can be good, but but the response rate is just so abysmal for male surveys that they really don't make a lot of sense to do anymore. And telephone and in-person surveys have strengths and have weaknesses as well. So you can look over this particular chart. We're going to talk very briefly about sampling. Sampling is about how you choose the people that you're going to either observe or survey or include in an experiment. A sample ultimately is designed to be a segment of the whole population that you're interested in. That doesn't mean the whole population of the world. It means the whole population of people that you're interested in studying or understanding. So for example, if you are looking to understand the pizza buying behavior of people in Charlottetown, well, the population is people in Charlottetown. You know, you're not going to survey or study every single person in Charlottetown. You're going to have a sample or small segment of that overall Charlottetown population that hopefully represents that greater population. So the requirements you want to think about are who you're going to survey, how many people you want to survey, and how you're going to make those decisions. So there's a bunch of different kinds of samples, and we're going to very, very briefly talk about them because really this is the kind of thing that we will spend a lot more time talking about in market research if you choose to take that course, and actually you will discuss sampling in your business research course as well, I believe in your second year. So there's two broad types of sampling. One is probability and the other is non-probability sampling. So within probability sampling, you have simple random sampling, which means that every member of the population that you're interested in has a known and equal chance of selection. So for example, if you knew the cell phone numbers of every single person in Charlottetown, and you randomly selected the phone numbers out of a hat and you contacted those people, that would be a random sample. A stratified random sample, the population is divided into mutually exclusive groups such as age groups, and then random samples are drawn from each group. So if you want to make sure that you collect enough results from certain segments of the population, so you want a certain number of females or a certain number of males or certain various age brackets, you can use a stratified random sample. So take that overall population and subdivide it a little bit and then use random sampling within those subdivisions. Or you can do cluster or area sampling, which is basically taking the population and dividing it into mutually exclusive groups, just like you did in stratified sampling, and then the researcher draws a sample from the groups to interview. When you look at non-probability sampling, there's something called convenience sampling, which means the researcher selects the people that are easiest to reach or are easiest to gather information from. So if I want to get a sense of the most popular pizza restaurants in Charlottetown, it would be super easy for me to just ask my students. That is not a random sample. That is not a representative sample of people in Charlottetown. However, it is a convenient sample. It's super convenient for me because I work at the university. I have pretty good access to students, and therefore it's a lot easier for me to ask students than to do some other kind of sampling methodology. However, I have to be very careful and recognize that the behavior of students attending UPEI is not necessarily the same as the average person in Charlottetown. So I have to recognize that my convenience sampling may actually result in inaccurate information if I try to take those results and apply them to a larger population. A judgment sample is when the researcher uses his or her own judgment to select the people who they think would be able to accurately answer the questions that I'm looking to answer. So, for example, I did a fairly recent research project where we were looking to interview local entrepreneurs in the PEI area. And so what I did was I actually knew a lot of entrepreneurs. Because of my job here at the university in the business faculty, as well as my previous work with Innovation PEI, I actually knew an awful lot of entrepreneurs. And so I used my own judgment to say, okay, I'm going to survey these people because I know they are the ones who have the information that I'm looking for. And you can use a quota sample. So the researcher may find and interview a prescribed number of people in each of several categories. So you may say, well, I want at least 50% female and 50% male. So I deliberately go out and seek people to fit those kind of criteria. If we know that recent immigrants represent 10% of the PEI population, then we may want to deliberately seek out recent immigrants to answer our survey questions so that we make sure that those voices are actually heard in our overall research. So those are just some examples of how we would go about choosing the people who would participate in our data collection process. Research instruments, you can develop a questionnaire. Develop a list of questions that you're going to ask the people that you are sampling to answer. And there's a couple of different kinds of questions. There's open-ended questions where people write in or speak their answer freely. You don't give them any choices. They're just free to answer however they would like. The challenge with open-ended questions, especially if the survey is one where the individual completes it themselves, where they have to either write out or type out their answer, open-ended questions can result in really rich information. But in general, people are considered to be very, very lazy, and they will very often skip open-ended questions or give you abbreviated answers that don't really reflect the full accurate information that you're looking for. So open-ended questions can be used, but they should be used sparingly and in full recognition that you may not get the rich information that you're looking for. Closed-ended questions are ones where you give people a defined set of answers from which they have to choose, little boxes they have to check or numbers that they have to circle. And typically, survey respondents find that much, much easier, much quicker to provide answers. But there's a lack of depth to the responses that they provide as well, because you can only provide so many choices, and so you have to think about those sorts of things. And there's a little bit of a trade-off. And very often, surveys will use both open-ended and closed-ended type questions in combination for the survey or the questionnaire. You also want to think about the wording and ordering of questions. Wording is critical, and actually we're going to focus our special topics discussion this week on how to word good questions. When I have a chance to talk to students who are in the business research class, they come to me and show me the survey that they've developed for their research project. Almost 100% of the time, my main concern is in the quality of the wording of their questions. It's not clear what they're asking, and if the question isn't clear, then the answers are going to be garbage. You also want to think strategically about the ordering of your questions. You often want to start with some fairly easy questions, get into the harsh or the meatier questions in the middle, and then end on some easy questions again. So you want to think about the ordering of the questions. You also can actually use mechanical instruments or technology to track or gather information. Every time you use a loyalty card, whether it's at Shoppers Drug Mart or Superstore or Sobeys or any Starbucks, any of those stores that have loyalty programs, every time you swipe your card, they're gathering information about you, and you're making it super easy for the companies to gather that information. And for the most part, many of us are quite comfortable about letting stores collect that information about us because we usually get something in return in the form of points or discounts or something like that. So mechanical instruments are a great way to get very, very accurate information. So there's no human error there. If I buy yogurt and milk and eggs at the grocery store and I scan my card, there's no error that's going to happen. The store records that I've purchased yogurt, eggs, and I forget what I told you, milk. So there's no errors there. So mechanical instrumentation or digital collection of data is actually growing in popularity and is an extremely effective way to gather certain types of information. The next stage of the research plan is to implement the research plan, to actually do it, to go out and actually collect the data that you're looking to gather, and then use statistical analysis to crunch the numbers and figure out what this information actually tells you. And the last stage of the research process is to interpret the findings. So once you have all these statistical numbers that tell you percentages and frequencies and likelihoods and all those sorts of things, what do those things actually mean? What do they tell you about your customers? And now that you know this, what kinds of decisions or conclusions can you make that will ultimately help the organization make better decisions? How are you going to report this information to management? How are you going to make sure that they have access to the latest information, especially if your data collection is ongoing? You're collecting data all the time. So at the grocery store, for example, they collect data every single day. How do they then report that information back to the people who need that information to make decisions? I speculate that they would provide reports either on a daily or weekly or monthly basis so that people can track changes over time or trends over time. So making sure you figure out a way to share that information with decision makers is a really important part of the research process. So analyzing and using marketing information, ultimately, this is all about managing the detailed information about individual consumers to maximize customer loyalty and build those relationships. It's all about capturing and analyzing information from all different sources of customers. So it could be, again, from the cash register, it could be from customers itself, it could be increasingly from online activity, so how people are engaging with your online social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. Those tools actually provide a wealth of analytical opportunities to gather information about customers, so you want to do that on a regular basis. And the information that you find may actually end up leading to new marketing opportunities. You may figure out that, you know what, people aren't really following us on Instagram. They seem to continue to like, based on who our customers are, they like our Facebook page. That's where they're going for to connect with us on social media. So we're going to use Facebook more as a result of finding out this information. Some of the things, though, that you want to think about when it comes to market research and marketing information, it's extremely important not to misuse information, because misused information can ultimately harm customers and your relationships with customers. Things like data breaches, we hear about that quite often now in the news, where a company's computer system has been hacked and customer information has been compromised. So when that happens, customers get very upset because ultimately we don't want our information in the hands of people who might use it for uh, more negative purposes. Customers are also increasingly concerned about their own privacy. Now, I say that even though we're in an era where people share information about themselves way more than we have in the past, but the reality is we still, as individuals, demand that we own our own information, and that in certain circumstances we demand privacy. So there may be some instances where people aren't comfortable sharing information. Now, typically, stores, for example, get around people's concerns about privacy by incentivizing you to share your information with them. That's why we are so willing to sign up to loyalty programs. Loyalty programs aren't just designed to make customers feel good. They're designed to enable the company to track information about their most loyal customers. And we're willing to share that information because we get something in return. We get points or discounts or some sort of benefit from using these loyalty cards. And so it's a win-win situation for both consumers and the companies. And of course, you can misuse information. You can sell information to third parties, and customers don't typically like that. You can use information to negatively target people or exclude people. So there is an opportunity there to misuse research findings, and customers are very cognizant of that and don't want companies behaving in that manner.